I have been fascinated by Bai Ningbing since I was a child. She went to school. I also went to school. I learned 8 languages. She studied finance. So I followed suit and studied finance. Because everyone believed that the Bai and Fang families were bound to unite in marriage. The business alliance was intricately woven together. It couldn't function without any of us. However, on the day of the wedding, Bai Ningbing took a detour on her way there. She went abroad to rescue her beloved Bai Yuguang, who had fallen into misfortune. Our childhood friendship instantly became the biggest joke. I was dressed in a meticulously prepared, exquisite suit. I alone carried out this grand wedding. That day, in the flood of press releases, my name was listed first before hers for the first time. Bai Ningbing's flight had already taken off. I locked myself in the lounge, and a tear fell from my eye. My furious father stood outside the lounge, cursing loudly. Uncle Bai angrily dialed one phone call after another, desperately trying to bring Bai Ningbing back as soon as she landed. I received 2 messages on my phone. One read, "Z-Man, wait for me to return. I'll give you an explanation." The other was a photo of Bai Ningbing. She was walking toward the gate. Her head was lowered, talking on the phone. She was wearing the wedding dress that I had meticulously designed with the designer. A gown for the bride to wear to meet the groom. The jewelry I had carefully selected hung loosely around her. Her brows and eyes were gentle, her gaze filled with affection. It was as though she was softly comforting the person on the other end of the call. Anyone who saw her would have to sigh and say, "The man she's soothing is truly lucky." I zoomed in on the photo, carefully studying it for a long while, my heart full of reluctance. However, I had given her a chance. She made her choice. She should bear it without regret. I adjusted my collar, opened the lounge door, and smiled as I greeted the various relatives outside. The wedding proceeded as planned. Bai Ningbing returned to the country 3 days later. In those 72 hours, I became the undisputed headline sensation. Domestic major newspapers, small tabloids, and social discussed media only how Fang Yuan, the eldest son of the Fang family, was abandoned by Bai Ningbing on his wedding day, but still insisted on completing all the complicated wedding procedures alone. Some lamented the coldness of wealthy families. Some spoke out in my defense. And of course, some took pleasure in my misfortune. In the overwhelming flood of press releases, my name was listed before Bai Ningbing's for the first time. As a gesture of respect for the Bai family, my father-in-law, Chairman Bai personally hosted a banquet to apologize to the Fang family. As the cups were raised and exchanged, the atmosphere grew intense. Chairman Bai lifted his glass to me and said, "This toast, Father is toasting you. You're truly the son of old Fang. Decisive and pragmatic. You saved face for both our families. The Bai family owes you an apology. I will make sure you get an explanation for this matter." I lowered my eyes and gracefully lifted my glass, just about to speak, when the door to the banquet hall was pushed open. Bai Ningbing walked in, dust and all. When my father saw her, he lowered the glass he was holding in midair with a thud. The large banquet hall instantly fell into a heavy silence. Chairman Bai glanced at my father, and then harshly addressed Bai Ningbing. Bai Ningbing slowly walked to my father, slightly bowing. This time I was in the wrong. My father snorted coldly, but didn't respond to her. Bai Ningbing straightened up and placed a document on the table. "I will make amends. On this trip to America, I signed the cooperation agreement with the BL on behalf of the Fang family as their daughter-in-law. As for the collaboration with BL, the Fang family has been negotiating it for half a year. All the details have been finalized, yet BL has been reluctant to sign. The Fang family tried all avenues, but could not find a breakthrough. My father has been so worried about this project that his hair has turned white. Bai Ningbing knows the value of doing things with a clear heart and mind. She brought out the contract. For the Fang family, this contract is a monumental achievement." My father was choked with emotion, staring at Bai Ningbing. Neither a frown nor a smile appeared on his face. He didn't know how to respond. Bai Ningbing stood there in front of my father, her hands at her sides, her brows gently furrowed. With a calm and composed expression on her face, Chairman Bai sighed in relief. He led the applause, Old Fang. What do you think? My daughter isn't bad, right? She helped you secure the BL deal. It's time to reward her. Chairman Bai took the lead, and after the initial awkwardness, the people at the table joined in with applause. The atmosphere began to heat up. But Bai Ningbing, you've embarrassed the Fang family so much. How do you think you can easily turn the page on this? I furrowed my brows, my eyes red, and walked up to Bai Ningbing. I looked her up and down. Why is it that you're still wearing the wedding dress from that day? Was Mr. Zia's care so demanding that you didn't have time to change your clothes? The banquet hall suddenly fell silent. Bai Ningbing's smile froze on her face. I forced a smile and walked up to her. I pushed her toward the door. Go take a bath and change your clothes first. Don't worry. I've got this. There was a loud thud behind me as the table was slammed. I knew it was my father. Chairman Bai's voice rang out, "Stop! Don't go anywhere!" A fragile figure rushed in from outside, pushing between Bai Ningbing and me. Don't make things difficult for Ningbing. It's all my fault. The person who arrived was none other than the one who caused Bai Ningbing to abandon me. Her Bai Yuguang Ziayu. Bai Ningbing was wearing a thin, pure white cotton dress, her fragile body trembling from the cold. Under the gaze of the crowd, Ziayu immediately took off his jacket and wrapped it around her. Bai Ningbing said to him, "Didn't I tell you to wait for me in the car? Why did you come up here?" Ziayu's face was pale, his eyes red. Don't argue with Chairman Bai because of me. I won't live much longer. I don't want to leave you with a mess. Before he could finish speaking, Ziayu began coughing violently. Bai Ningbing's brows furrowed deeply. Without a word, she picked Ziayu up in her arms. "Ah, you. I'll take you to the hospital." She didn't even glance at anyone present. Bai Ningbing lowered her head, comforting Ziayu softly as she walked toward the exit. "Stop right there." Chairman Bai was furious and shouted loudly, "If you dare walk out that door, everything related to the Bai family will have nothing to do with you." Bai Ningbing stopped in her tracks. She turned around and coldly looked at Chairman Bai. "The biggest regret I have is letting you send you abroad back then. You think you can still control me like you did in the past?" Chairman Bai's face turned ashen, but he was speechless. My father shook his head. "It seems you can no longer be the head of the Bai family." Bai Ningbing looked at my father. "The first thing I did when I returned was not to arrange for you to be hospitalized, but to bring you the BL contract. This is the greatest sincerity I can offer for future cooperation between our families. Some things that shouldn't be said, let them rot in my heart." Bai Ningbing's eyes were icy, her voice devoid of warmth. "I promised to marry you, and I've done it. I gave you the title of Bai family's son-in-law. I promised you a life without worries. As for feelings, I suggest you don't expect too much." With that, she carried Ziayu and walked out without looking back. Ziayu turned his head. He looked at me with a faint, almost imperceptible smile. His lips curled up just slightly. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Bai Ningbing and I had grown up together as childhood sweethearts. We were inseparable. I had been her shadow since childhood. I learned foreign languages, business, horse riding, and wine tasting. I had no personal hobbies. Bai Ningbing's hobbies were simply Fang Yuan's hobbies. The business between the Bai and Fang families had been interwoven since the time of our mothers. That's why everyone assumed Bai Ningbing and I would marry. It was something all the elders had agreed upon. The only unexpected turn came in the second year of high school. Ziayu received a scholarship from the school and transferred to our class as a poor student. He was like a sunflower growing in the ruins, fragile yet resilient. He easily stirred Bai Ningbing's sympathy. Her youthful affection blossomed, but was immediately crushed by Uncle Bai. Even though Bai Ningbing protested strongly, Ziayu was still sent abroad by Uncle Bai. Bai Ningbing completely lost her connection to Ziayu. After that, she became silent, and in that silence, she grew rapidly, gradually shouldering the burden of the Bai family. When I proposed to her, I had asked, if Ziyu returns, what would you choose? At that time, her eyes sparkled with starlight, and she looked at me with deep, focused affection. He is just an insignificant interlude. My groom will only be you. That day, the kiss she left in my eyes still held warmth, but things had already changed. Growing up, I had cried in front of others only a handful of times. Seeing me cry in public was probably more painful than if I had killed my father. My father, without regard for face, shouted angrily at Uncle Bai and immediately took me home. I didn't forget to take the contract with BL. Bai Ningbing didn't come to find me. Her and Zia Yu's news still reached my ears through my little brother's whispers. Zia Yu was diagnosed with cancer. With little time left, yet he refused to be hospitalized. He almost obsessively insisted on staying in the wedding room I had prepared for Bai Ningbing and me. Such an absurd request, yet Bai Ningbing didn't refuse. Lin Zi, furious, began to rant in front of me. Z man, aren't you going to react? Aren't you angry at all? I stopped my work. I closed my eyes for a moment and felt it, a little sad, but not too much. I saw Lin Zi getting so angry his face was turning red. I smiled and tapped his forehead gently. The contract with BL had already reached its first payment milestone. I needed to keep a close eye on it. Money was 100 times more important than women. My brother Lin Zi gave me a sharp look. Come on, stop it. Z man, you're not the one lacking money. With the Fang and Bai families, if you step on their toes, the entire circle will shake. Seeing him so angry, he was about to pass out. I gave him a reassuring pill. Don't worry. This isn't over. Zia, you would probably come to find me soon. Just as I expected, seeing my indifferent reaction to his challenge, Zia, you couldn't hold himself back and came to find me. We sat in a cafe on the top floor of the Fang building. I carefully observed him. Smiling, Mr. Zia, you're looking well. It seems Ningbing has been taking good care of you. Zia stretched his hand out in front of me. Does it look familiar? It's the Bai family's heirloom ring. If I'm not mistaken, it was given to you by Uncle Bai the day you proposed to Ningbing. I saw you wrapping it up tightly and carefully storing it in a cabinet, treating it like a precious treasure. I only looked at it for a couple of seconds, and Ningbing gave it to me. You're just relying on your background, occupying the Fang family's identity. Other than that, you have nothing. But I, aside from my background, have everything you don't have. Looking at Zia Yu's arrogant expression, I couldn't help but find it somewhat amusing. Mr. Zia, congratulations on your beautiful dream coming true. There's one detail you might not have noticed, but I'd like to remind you. Uncle Bai sent you abroad for so many years. You tried everything, but still couldn't get in touch with Ningbing. Guess who? Who, right before my wedding with Ningbing, leaked the news of our marriage to you? Why do you think that was? You couldn't get through to Ningbing's phone for 10 years, but suddenly you could reach her. Zia Yu froze. He widened his eyes, staring at me in disbelief. It couldn't have been you, could it? Are you crazy? I leaned back in my chair, smiling and remaining silent. Zia Yu stared at me for a long time, his eyes beginning to flicker. Fang Yuan, what exactly is your goal? I felt like I had heard the biggest joke. Does that question even need to be asked? Of course, I want to defend my family and protect my wife. I spent over 20 years to marry Bai Ningbing. How could I just hand her over to you? Zia Yu was furious. He grabbed the coffee cup on the table and tried to throw it at me. I took out a document and handed it to him. Once he saw the words on the paper, Zia Yu's fair face turned ashen. How do you have this? He picked up his bag and stood up. I won't give up. Let's see who has the better skills. I was invited to attend Bai Shi's young master Bai Ruofeng's 20th birthday party. As I entered, I happened to see Bai Ruofeng raise his hand. With a sharp slap, he hit Zia Yu's face. The sound of the slap echoed loudly, Zia Yu's fair, soft face visibly swelled on one side. Young Master Bai was clearly livid. He grabbed Zia Yu's hair, and Zia Yu was forced to fall to the ground. The young master tried to step forward again, but Bai Ningbing's calm voice stopped him. Bai Ruofeng halted in his tracks, turned to look at Bai Ningbing, tears welling up in his eyes. He tugged at his beautiful little suit, which had been splashed with red wine. The wine kept dripping down. Bai sister, I invited you to my birthday party, and you let me suffer like this? It was clear this was Zia Yu's doing. Bai Ruofeng was the youngest son of Chairman Bai, with 3 older sisters. He had been spoiled since childhood. Since he was 16, Bai Ruofeng had been acting. By the time he was 20, he had swept all the major awards in the entertainment industry. With fame came recognition. He was the youngest and most sought-after actor. When had he ever suffered such an insult? Before Bai Ningbing could speak, Zia Yu climbed up from the ground. He rushed toward Bai Ruofeng, shoving him aside. Stay away from Ningbing. Look at how you're dressed. Coming to see Ningbing, asking her to drink with you. Who doesn't know what your intentions are? Zia Yu turned to Bai Ningbing, with one side of his face swollen and red, tears flowing down like pearls from a broken string. He looked on the verge of breaking down. Ningbing, I understand now. I've caused you trouble. I don't have a distinguished family background, nor the time to build a career like Mr. Bai. Everything I've endured, I deserve it. Zia Yu's face was full of desolation. His voice trembled with a hint of sobs. Bai Ningbing's heart ached deeply. She gently stroked Zia Yu's face and softly said, "Fool, I am your greatest support." Zia Yu tilted his head back, a glimmer of hope flashing in his eyes. I also want to act like Mr. Bai, win the Best Actor award, and be loved by thousands of fans. Would you support me? Bai Ningbing immediately pulled out her phone, dialing a number. She swiftly arranged to set up a film company to promote Zia Yu. She made it clear and decisive. I watched the absurd scene before me from a distance and found it ridiculous. People, in the end, are bound for life by things they could not attain when they were young. The once proud and untouchable Bai Ningbing was now without any suspense, about to be pulled down from her pedestal by Zia Yu. Bai Ningbing gradually became the laughingstock in her social circle. Of course, I was no exception. Zia Yu firmly occupied her life. At every meeting she attended, at every event she participated in, Zia Yu was always by her side. After Zia Yu had gone on a few wild outbursts, all the men in the circle intelligently distanced themselves from Bai Ningbing. The next time I saw Bai Ningbing was after the Bai and Fang families had joined forces to sign a major government project. We had to attend a press conference led by the city government. The elders had gradually stepped back as the leaders of the group. Bai Ningbing and I were naturally responsible for attending such events. While waiting, I saw that Bai Ningbing was alone. I couldn't help but tease. Mr. Zia didn't come with you today? Bai Ningbing looked at me, and there was a hint of bitterness in her gaze. He's filming. Just a few months ago, she had told me not to expect her feelings. Now she was smiling at me. This event is very important, so you should accompany me, my husband. I subtly took 2 steps back, keeping just the right distance from her. Polite yet distant, Miss Bai. At such an occasion, it's more appropriate to call me Mr. Fang. Bai Ningbing's smile instantly froze on her face. She took a step forward, her expression somewhat strained as she tried to speak. Just then, the host invited the guests to enter. I ignored the complicated emotion in Bai Ningbing's eyes, nodded at her, and turned to walk into the venue. The press conference was being live-streamed. Suddenly, I remembered a question. I turned to Bai Ningbing, who was sitting on my right, and confirmed. Does Mr. Zia know that we'll be attending this event together? The host spoke loudly, and to hear my words clearly, Bai Ningbing slightly tilted her head toward me. As soon as I finished speaking, Bai Ningbing's phone, which was placed on the table, began vibrating wildly. The host announced that the press conference had officially started. The city leaders gave their speeches. Bai Ningbing hesitated for a second, then reached out and hung up the phone. During the 5 minutes of the city leader's speech, Bai Ningbing's phone vibrated nonstop, like a persistent little demon, shaking for 5 whole minutes. I watched the name Zia Yu flash on the screen. Turning to Bai Ningbing, I smiled. "How's your relationship with Mr. Zia?" Bai Ningbing pressed her lips together and didn't respond. After the speech, it was time for the winning company to make a statement. The live camera focused on me. Sitting for too long, I felt my blood circulation slowing down. I instinctively shifted toward Bai Ningbing. Bai Ningbing immediately stood up and supported me. My hand rested in hers. I looked up at her, smiling with my eyes narrowed. "Thank you, Miss Bai." Bai Ningbing was momentarily stunned, gazing at me with a soft expression until I smiled and pulled my hand away. I hadn't finished reading my statement yet, when suddenly a staff member rushed in. He whispered something in the host's ear. The host's expression changed. He quickly reported to the city leaders. After getting approval from the leaders, the large screen in the venue was turned on. The signal was connected. Zia Yu's figure appeared on the screen, standing on a rooftop. His face was flushed. His emotions were so intense that they were on the verge of breaking. "Ningbing, why aren't you answering my calls? Feng Yuan is smiling at you so openly. Are you moved? Why do you have to force me to act like this? Before you'll agree to meet with me?" The camera quickly focused on Bai Ningbing. She jumped up suddenly, glaring at the big screen. I'm at work. Please don't be impulsive. Come down first." Zia Yu was completely out of control. He shouted desperately, "I don't believe it. I don't believe you've already gotten to this point. The things you don't want to do. Who can force you to do them? You just want to see Feng Yuan. Don't you? You got married, and now you're staying with him. You want to see him, and you even reach out to help him. You're even touching his hand." Bai Ningbing tiredly rubbed her temples, softened her voice and coaxed, "I'll go back and find you now. Is that okay?" Zia Yu's voice cracked with emotion. "No, unless you prove it to me by slapping Feng Yuan in the face. Then I'll believe that the person you love is me." Bai Ningbing looked at the city leaders sitting next to her. The leader's face was as black as the bottom of a pot, not even giving her a glance. Bai Ningbing straightened her face. "You, stop being ridiculous." It seemed that Bai Ningbing had never spoken harshly to Zia Yu before. As soon as those words left her mouth, Zia Yu completely lost it. He rushed down from the rooftop, jumped into his car, and sped toward the crowd, driving recklessly. There were many extras at the scene, and they had no time to dodge. We could only watch from the screen as some people were knocked to the ground. Zia Yu showed no signs of stopping. He sped off. When we arrived at the scene, both the police and ambulance had already arrived. The scene was chaotic. Injured people were lying everywhere, blood staining the ground. A truly horrifying sight. I immediately made a decision, instructing the staff to open all the RV doors and help the lightly injured into the RVs to rest. At that moment, Bai Ningbing's phone suddenly rang. Zia Yu's voice, choked with tears, came through. "Ningbing, I was wrong. My car hit a tree. I'm stuck. There's so much blood." I glanced over. Bai Ningbing was busy helping the injured, so she put the phone on speaker. Hearing Zia Yu's words, she immediately stood up and anxiously asked, Are you? I'll come find you right away." As she spoke, she walked toward the exit. I sighed and called out to her from behind. After such a big incident, "You can't leave. The film company is a subsidiary of the Fang family. If the follow-up arrangements aren't handled properly, it will severely affect the image of the Fang family. You must stay and handle the aftermath." Perhaps hearing my voice, Zia Yu cried even harder. "Will I never see you again? If I die like this, don't forget me." Bai Ningbing hesitated. Her eyes filled with pain and hesitation. She gritted her teeth, bent her back, which was usually so straight, toward me. Z-man, I'm leaving this to you. He's in the late stages of cancer. Won't live much longer. He owes you. I'll repay you. In the future. Before I could respond, Bai Ningbing turned around and started to leave. Do you know what my nickname Z-man means? I asked softly. Her footsteps paused for a moment. Maybe she heard me, but she didn't turn around. She walked away with large strides. I sighed helplessly, muttering to myself. Z-man refers to the small fullness season. When crops begin to ripen, the harvest season should be full of hope. But this group event was like a dream, dragging everyone into the abyss. Bai Ningbing's behavior of fleeing from the scene was captured by passers-by and posted online, making the situation even worse for the Fang family, who were already in the public eye. I worked non-stop for 48 hours, taking charge as the young master of the Fang family. I comforted the injured and presented a fair and feasible compensation plan. In the end, I managed to minimize the negative impact. When I had finished handling everything, I dragged my exhausted body out of the Bai family building. I was startled by a figure standing by the door. It was Bai Ningbing. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she looked completely worn out. She opened her mouth, and her hoarse voice was barely audible. I can hardly understand what you're saying. You has been arrested. My father was so angry, he had a heart attack, and he's still in the ICU being resuscitated. I looked up at the sky. The first light of dawn was breaking. A streak of morning sunlight was about to pierce through the darkness. It seemed like I couldn't see Bai Ningbing's despair. I smiled at her and said something without any context. The sky's about to get light. Chairman Bai finally woke up. Bai Ningbing and I rushed to the hospital. When Chairman Bai regained consciousness, half of his hair had turned white. Seeing Bai Ningbing, he closed his eyes in disappointment, turning his head to the side. Uncle Bai's eyes were swollen from crying. He stood up, grabbed my hand, and tears began to fall again. Bai Ningbing hadn't spoken yet. When her phone rang, she hesitated before answering on speakerphone. A voice came through on the other end. Hello, is this Miss Bai Ningbing? Mr. Ziyu has been arrested and is in our detention center. He's insisting on seeing you. After we refused his request according to the rules, he bit his own tongue and tried to commit suicide. We found him in time. Mr. Zia only suffered some external injuries. Before the person on the phone could finish, Bai Ningbing had already turned and was running back toward the door. Ningbing, come back! Madam Bai suddenly burst into tears. Bai Ningbing hesitated for a moment, then opened the door and left without looking back. Chairman Bai closed his eyes in pain, tears slipping down from the corner of his eyes. I stood by, and the atmosphere became awkward. Just as I was debating whether I should leave, Chairman Bai's assistant rushed in. Chairman, not good. I instinctively grabbed her. Assistant Chen, slow down and tell me what happened. Assistant Chen, breathless, looked at Chairman Bai, who lay on the hospital bed, pale like death. Chairman Bai waved his hand. It's all right. Go ahead. Assistant Chen cautiously said. We just received a notification from the city government. They are very dissatisfied with Bai Ruofeng's performance in this incident. They are demanding that the Bai family withdraw from this project, or at least consider replacing Ruofeng as manager before moving forward. Madam Bai stood up abruptly, panicking. Chairman Bai lay on the bed, breathing heavily. The blood pressure monitor by the bed started alarming wildly. I quickly pressed the service button by the bed before the nurse arrived. Chairman Bai couldn't catch his breath. He had a stroke. With timely rescue, his life was saved, but half of his body was paralyzed. The rest of his life would be spent lying on the hospital bed. When Bai Ningbing received the news, she rushed back from the detention center. What awaited her was the decision to replace Ruofeng as manager. I was the one appointed to take over. She stood outside Chairman Bai's hospital room for days, but Chairman Bai refused to see her. After handling the business matters, I was too exhausted and decided to sleep in my office for the night. My phone buzzed with a vibration. It was by Ningning. I hesitated for a moment, and then answered the phone. It was quiet on the other end. I called out softly, but she didn't respond. Bai Ningbing must have been drinking. Her voice, soft and misty, lingered in the night. I brought the ring back. I've placed it back in its original spot. It's been so many days. Why haven't you come to take it? I hesitated, trying to soften my tone. Ningbing, you know that ... I've never used anything that's been used by someone else. She stayed silent for a long while. Then I heard her self-deprecating laugh. That includes people, right? Am I right? I didn't know how to respond. So I softly murmured, maybe because I hadn't hung up the phone. She felt the urge to pour out her feelings. Bai Ningbing laughed and cried on the phone. He lied to me. He never had cancer. He used cancer to get my sympathy. No wonder he refused to go to the hospital. He insisted on staying at home. When he was examined at the detention center, I found out he was never sick. When she got to the most emotional part, Bai Ningbing burst into tears. Z-man, I regret it so much. I hated my father for over 10 years for a person like him. I missed our wedding for him. I gave you my heart. In this world, there is only you. Only you have always treated me with sincerity. As Bai Ningbing spoke, I quietly listened. The gentle evening breeze blew in through the window. It swayed gently. I began to remember that year, when Zia Yu was sent abroad by Uncle Bai. Bai Ningbing then took out her frustration on me. She gave me the cold shoulder for a long time, but I was always worried about her. Every night when she and her friends drank too much, I would go look for her. I would take a driver and bring her home. That night, the evening breeze was gentle, just like tonight. I stood by the door of the VIP room and overheard her friend ask her, Fang Yuan searches for you all over the world every day. It's really pitiful to watch. Why not tell him the truth? Let him go free. The evening breeze was so gentle. I remembered what Bai Ningbing said. If it weren't for the marriage arrangement with Fang Yuan, you would never have been treated so unfairly. Yu is suffering alone abroad. Why does Fang Yuan get to be happy? I not only have to marry him, but I will also swallow the Fang family. I'll make him the laughingstock of the world. I snapped back from my memories. Bai Ningbing was silent. She must have fallen asleep. I could hear her shallow breathing through the microphone. I smiled softly. Bai Ningbing, Z-Man won't wait for you forever. Z-Man has already moved on. I've come a long way. On a beautiful afternoon, I went with Bai Ruofeng to visit Zia Yu at the detention center. The physical and mental torment had left him particularly worn out. He looked more like a small white flower on the verge of being blown away by the wind. Through the thick bulletproof glass, Zia Yu stared at me fiercely, his gaze like it was laced with poison. Fang Yuan, are you here to flaunt your victory? I laughed softly. You are just a pawn. I opened my phone, showing him the photo of Bai Ningbing in her bridal dress at the boarding gate. My people managed to capture the photo of Bai Ningbing boarding the plane. From the very beginning, you were being used. You thought you were Bai Ningbing's Bai Yuguang, but in reality, you were just a tool being manipulated. The Bai family wanted to use your appearance to disrupt the Fang family's plans, and I too was playing along with their scheme. Bai Ningbing was crazy about you. The Bai family was in disarray, and the first seized the opportunity to slowly take control of the situation. I spoke calmly, watching Zia Yu's face turn pale bit by bit. You, how could you do this? Zia Yu's voice trembled, anger and resentment swirling in his eyes. The business world is like a battlefield. There are no permanent enemies, nor permanent friends. You were too naive, thinking that a little bit of affection could allow you to act recklessly. In this complicated world, I put my phone away and no longer looked at him. I turned and walked away with Bai Ruofeng. We left the detention center, and the sunlight hit my body. It was warm. Bai Ruofeng patted me on the shoulder. Brother, What do you plan to do next? As for the Bai family, I took a deep breath. Looking into the distance, the Bai family cannot fall. After all, there are so many employees to support. As for Bai Ningbing, let her fate decide. I've already tried my best for this relationship. Now, it's time to plan for my own life. Back at the company, I threw myself into work, leading the joint team of Fang and Bai families. We reorganized the project and restored our reputation in the business. Days passed by. One day, I was handling documents in my office when the secretary knocked on the door. Mr. Fang, Miss Bai is outside. She says she wants to see you. I paused for a moment, putting my pen down. Let her in. Bai Ningbing walked in. She had lost weight, and there was a hint of calmness and loneliness in her eyes. Z-man. She hesitated to speak. Sit down. I pointed to the chair opposite me. What's the matter? I want to apologize for what happened before. And I also want to ask if there's still any possibility for us. Bai Ningbing gathered her courage and said. I looked at her, feeling a mix of emotions. She was the one I had always been thinking about. But now, everything had changed. Let the past be the past. We both need to look forward. I answered calmly. A trace of disappointment flashed in Bai Ningbing's eyes, but soon she regained her composure. I understand. However, I still want to give it a try. Regardless, thank you for not abandoning the Bai family when I was at my lowest. The Bai family and the Fang family are already so closely connected. This is what I should have done. I stood up, walked over to the window, and said, from now on, take good care of yourself and visit Uncle more often. After Bai Ningbing left, I looked out at the bustling streets, feeling a sense of relief in my heart. Life is like a play, with its ups and downs, its sorrows and joys. The love, hate, and grudges of the past have all turned to fleeting memories. And I will move forward with a brand new version of myself toward a new future. I could have stopped her. That day was also my final opportunity to give her a chance. I spoke with a calm tone, but my words were firm and undeniable. Yu seemed struck by a thunderbolt. His whole body shook violently, and he finally reacted. His eyes widened like copper bells, filled with shock and anger. You deliberately leaked the news of your marriage to me. You purposely brought me back, making me the one to destroy everything. He stood up in agitation, slamming his hands against the glass, the sound echoing painfully in the small visiting room. Crazy! You're a madman! Don't you love Bai Ningbing? What exactly do you want to do? His emotions were so intense, his gaze landing on Bai Ruofeng, who was standing behind me. As if he had found a new outlet for his anger, he began to yell at Bai Ruofeng as well. And you! If it weren't for you provoking me, I would never have wanted to enter the entertainment industry. If it weren't for the entertainment industry, there wouldn't have been so many people gathered there. I wouldn't have committed a crime. I wouldn't have been locked up. And I wouldn't have been caught faking illness by Ningbing. My good life has been ruined by both of you. I frowned slightly, a sense of helplessness rising within me. At this point, how could he still be so confused? Why all this? Did he still think my goal was Bai Ningbing? My goal was always the Bai family, not her. Yu was forcibly restrained by the guards and pressed back into his chair, but he continued shouting. Why does it concern me? Why do your rich people's games concern me? Why drag me into this? I stood up, took a step forward, and locked eyes with him. In a cold tone, I said, you took my place. When you insisted on staying in my wedding room, you took what wasn't yours. When you took my ring, why didn't you say it was a rich man's game? Why are you making such a fuss? Yu broke free from the guards, and once again threw himself against the glass, yelling angrily, Fang Yuan, wait for it. I will definitely tell Bai Ningbing. I will. I took 2 steps back, a mocking smile on my face. and waved at him. That was the end of this farce. And I hung up the phone. Any breakthrough. Bai Rufeng looked at me with curiosity. How were you so sure they would take the bait? I pondered for a moment, then slowly replied, in life, people can never escape their desires. Bai Ningbing has had an easy life. Zia Yu is her only setback. She will inevitably be trapped by him. And Zia Yu, he never gave up for over a decade. Try every possible way to contact Bai Ningbing. As long as you give him hope, he will be uncontrollably drawn to her. He will hold on to her like a lifeline. That's how I dragged both of them into the abyss. We both fell silent, but I too was trapped in the game. Fortunately, with the support of the older generation. After I took over the Bai family, things transitioned smoothly. The affairs of both families were incredibly complicated. After extensive discussions, I presented a feasible plan. After getting the shareholders' approval, the Bai and Fang families officially merged, once competing commercial giants. Now, under my leadership, they became an unshakable force. The group thrived under my management, while Bai Ningbing lost everything she once had. She spent her days in the wedding room, studying my favorite foods, asking if I would come home for dinner. But that so-called home, I never returned to again. Life drifted by, neither good nor bad. Then Zia Yu was released after serving his sentence. The final blow came. Bai Ningbing stormed into my office with Zia Yu. She looked like she might break at any second. She stood before me, her hands trembling, trying to reach out to me. Her voice carried a trace of pleading. I want you to tell me with your own mouth that Zia Yu was lying. Zia Yu stood behind Bai Ningbing, his face full of smugness, his head held high, looking like a victorious rooster. In Bai Ningbing's hopeful gaze, I replied calmly, what he said is likely true, if he didn't exaggerate the truth. Bai Ningbing seemed to be struck by a heavy blow, stepping back to paces. Zia Yu, seeing this, tried to step forward to support her, but she forcefully shoved his hand away. Was everything a lie? All those years we spent together ... You followed me, learning foreign languages and finance, always pestering me to teach you ... Was that all fake? When you promised to marry me, you seemed so happy. Was everything a lie? I thought you were the only person who truly cared for me. Why would you do this to me too? Her voice was laced with sobs, and a barrage of questions hit me like bombs. I didn't answer her series of whys, but instead, I took a document from the file cabinet behind me and placed it in front of her. I think this document will give you the answer. Bai Ningbing shakily picked up the document, and after reading the contents, sweat began to slide down her temple. I motioned for Zia Yu to help her sit on the couch and handed her a cup of coffee. Let's be straightforward. The Fang family has exhausted all efforts, but we couldn't secure the BL cooperation deal. The director of BL is your old friend from when you studied in the US. And you used the Bai family's deal with her as leverage, demanding she indefinitely postpone the cooperation with the Fang family. Your goal was to bring down the Fang family. Am I right? I looked at Bai Ningbing, then shifted my gaze to Zia Yu, who was standing beside us, completely confused. I flashed a knowing smile. By the way, I should thank Mr. Zia. When you heard that Mr. Zia was seriously ill, you couldn't wait to go abroad to bring him back, even if it meant missing our wedding. To do so, you had to present the BL contract. To calm my father's fury, I know Zia Yu is your unresolved issue, but it was Uncle Bai who tore you apart. As a teenager, Fang Yuan did nothing wrong, but you redirected all your anger at me and at the Fang family. I treated you with all sincerity, but you've been calculating from the start. Why did you marry me? Because you needed the Fang family's support. Now, I guess I've fulfilled your dream. Since the Fang and Bai families have officially merged under my leadership, we're still husband and wife. Perhaps, in the end, you're the one who fulfilled your dream. Bai Ningbing looked at me with reddened eyes. her voice rough and hoarse. You clearly don't love me, and you know I've been scheming against you. Why did you marry me? I watched her from a distance, as though I were looking at a complete stranger. Bai Ningbing, this should be the question you'd ask. The identity of being the Bai family's son-in-law is the greatest support I needed to complete this entire plan. Bai Ningbing was silent for a long time, so long that I almost lost my patience. Finally, she stood up, without saying a word. Taking step after step toward the door, she placed her hand on the doorknob, turned around, and said slowly, word by word, "I will take everything that belongs to me back." In the following days, Bai Ningbing made many efforts, both openly and secretly, but all of them failed. The two groups had deeply merged. She became despondent for 2 years. All she had left were a few shares with limited dividends, and no real power or support. After several closed-door negotiations, her spirit was completely crushed. She finally became the person she hated the most, a pampered rich kid who only knew how to spend money. On my 25th birthday, Lindsay and Bai Ruofeng took the lead, inviting the second-generation heirs from our circle for a grand celebration. I sat on the couch, letting them laugh and play. Lindsay couldn't stand it anymore, so he brought over 10 female models, standing in front of me, forcing me to choose one. He grinned and leaned in close. 3 is fine too. I squinted my eyes and casually scanned them, pointing to one at random. The model lowered her head in front of me, hesitantly calling my name. Her youthful appearance was delicate, and her hands massaged my thighs, neither too light nor too heavy. I comfortably closed my eyes. Time seemed to stop, until Bai Ningbing's angry voice pierced through. "Don't forget, you're still my husband." The young model seemed startled, her hands trembling. I patted her hand, motioning for her to continue, facing Bai Ningbing's gaze, which seemed to want to devour me. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. "I promised to marry you, and I've done it. The title of Fang Yuan's wife, I've given it to you. I guarantee you'll live a life without worries. As for feelings, Miss Bai, I suggest you don't expect too much." Laughter rang out from around me. In that moment, I felt like I was seeing the young man from over 10 years ago, the one who had followed Bai Ningbing around like a shadow. And finally, he stopped in his tracks.